I want to put a reward up for $50,000 for anybody that could give the information that will lead to an arrest and a conviction in the case of what happened. He was not on that island by himself. Somebody saw something and knows something. So I didn't come to make money. I came to give money. Stand up and tell the truth.
We want the truth no matter who is implicated or exonerated. We want justice no matter who it acquits or convicts. Those words came from a civil rights attorney standing outside a Mississippi church moments after a preacher had just done something no one in that room expected. He announced a reward, $50,000 from his own organization for anyone with information that could lead to an arrest. And before he even finished speaking, the man who'd quietly paid for the entire funeral stood up and matched it, doubled it, $100,000, on the table for a case officials have already said shows no signs of foul play. So why does it need a bounty? Why is the FBI involved? Why is this now headed to a grand jury? A boat went out with a group of friends on the 4th of July. It came back without one of them. And in the 3 weeks since, that simple, terrible fact has pulled in a civil rights attorney, a sitting judge whose own family is now receiving death threats, and 6 figures offered publicly at a funeral. Somewhere between what happened on that island and what's being said about it now, there's a gap. Today, we're going to walk through every piece of it. Welcome back to Cat Crime Trending, where we bring you the cases everyone's talking about and the facts everyone's still trying to piece together. Today's case, the death of Nolan Xavier Wells. Before we get into it, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from. We love seeing how far this community reaches. All right, let's get into it. It was Monday, the 20th of July, 2026. Center Point Church, Ocean Springs, Mississippi, was filled past capacity. Family, friends, strangers who'd never met Nolan Wells but felt like they knew him anyway, after weeks of headlines. Reverend Sharpton stood to deliver the eulogy and turned it into something more. He announced a $50,000 reward funded by his own organization, the National Action Network, for anyone who could offer information leading to an arrest and conviction in Wells' case. Then, by the end of that same eulogy, filmmaker Tyler Perry, the man who had already quietly covered every cost of the funeral, stood and offered to match it. $50,000 became $100,000, announced in real time in front of a grieving family and a room full of cameras. Attorney Ben Crump followed at a news conference right after the service, telling reporters, "We want the truth no matter who is implicated or exonerated. We want justice no matter who it acquits or convicts." That's not the language of a family that considers this case closed. And it's not the language Jackson County officials have used either. They've maintained, publicly, that no foul play has been identified. So which is it? An accident the family can't yet accept, or a truth someone is still working to protect? That question, more than any single piece of evidence, is what's kept this case in the national conversation for 3 straight weeks. And to understand it, we have to go back to where it started. Not at the funeral. At the beginning, Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old. He was born and raised in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, a small coastal city on the Gulf, the kind of place where everybody tends to know everybody. Nolan graduated from Ocean Springs High School in 2025, and by the time he crossed that stage, he was known. The kind of student athlete whose name gets mentioned at pep rallies and Sunday dinners alike. He played multiple sports throughout high school, a true multi-sport athlete who competed across different seasons in different uniforms, always with the same energy. Coaches described him as coachable, hardworking, and easy to root for, the kind of athlete who made the people around him better simply by being present. Football carried him forward. After graduating in 2025, Nolan enrolled at Southwest Mississippi Community College, continuing his football career as a wide receiver. It represented years of discipline, early mornings, and film sessions, and a family that believed in what he was building. But those who loved him described someone far gentler than the image of a football player. His mother, Christine Wansley, described him as having a gentle, calming spirit, the kind of presence that put people at ease the moment he walked into a room. She's spoken about the corny jokes he told and the gentle smile that made everyone around him feel comfortable and loved. Nolan at 18 had already told his family he hoped to have 3 daughters of his own one day, a young man who had already imagined the kind of life and home he wanted to build. His father, Elmore Wansley, has talked about taking Nolan to the gym to work out, to the beach to run drills in the sand, teaching him to study film and read his opponents, preparing like a professional even as a teenager. This wasn't just a father raising an athlete. It was a father raising a young man, using football as the language through which he passed down discipline, focus, and love. Those who knew Nolan outside of athletics describe him as protective and nurturing by nature, someone whose quiet confidence and presence alone had a way of calming a room. He had just finished his freshman year of college football, still building the foundation of the life he wanted, with 2 younger siblings who looked up to him. This is the young man who traveled to Horn Island on the 4th of July with a group of friends, expecting nothing more than a holiday on the water. On the 4th of July, 2026, he got on a boat, headed toward an island just off the Mississippi coast, with no idea that he would never make the trip back home. The morning of the 4th of July, 2026, began like countless other summer holidays along the Mississippi coast. At approximately 9:56 in the morning, a boat pulled away from a private dock on El Camino Real Road in Ocean Springs, a private vessel carrying a small group of friends who had grown up around each other. Among them was Nolan Wells, and also aboard was his close friend Traciston Shepard, who would later become one of the central voices in piecing together what happened that day. Their destination was Horn Island, a barrier island sitting roughly 10 miles off the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Horn Island is part of the Gulf Islands National Seashore, land-owned and managed by the National Park Service, designated a federal wilderness area by Congress in 1978, one of the last truly undeveloped barrier islands on the entire Gulf Coast. There's no public ferry there. The only way to reach it is by private boat. And once you're there, you're truly on your own. No drinking water, no shelter, no restrooms, no lifeguard towers, and critically, no cell phone service at all. If something goes wrong, you cannot simply call for help. That isolation is exactly what makes Horn Island so beloved, and exactly why it draws enormous crowds every 4th of July. The boat carrying Nolan and his friends arrived at 11:14 in the morning. Boats anchored in clusters, groups spread across the sand, music carried across the water, coolers opened, an ordinary celebratory 4th of July. Worth noting here, because it becomes relevant later in how this case has been discussed publicly, the friend group Nolan traveled with that day has been described in reporting as predominantly white, with Nolan among the few black members. In the weeks after his death, that detail became part of a much larger public conversation, one we'll return to later in this story. As the day went on, the crowd on Horn Island grew larger, and by early afternoon, witnesses would describe the island as absolutely packed. Hundreds of people scattered across the sand and shallow water, boats anchored close enough that walking between them was easy. And yet, according to attorney Ben Crump's office, the last confirmed sighting of Nolan Wells on Horn Island was at approximately 3 o'clock that afternoon. 3 o'clock, in the middle of a holiday crowd numbering in the hundreds, on an island where, by every description available, everyone could see everyone else. Everything that came after hinges on what happened in the hours between that sighting and the moment his friends eventually left the island without him. The group that traveled to Horn Island that day had been drinking since late morning, according to one of the friends who was there, on a trip framed as one last hurrah before the holiday ended. Traciston Shepard, one of Nolan's closest friends, later made the decision to speak publicly about that day, choosing to do so by phone rather than on camera with Good Morning America, asking that his voice be altered, saying he and other friends had already received death threats since Nolan's body was found. "We did no wrong here, and we don't understand how we're getting so much hate behind us," Shepard said. "We all cared and loved Nolan, and nobody wanted to see Nolan die." It was in that same conversation that Shepard offered the first individual, on-the-record explanation for why Nolan didn't leave with the group. According to Shepard, Nolan met a girl on Horn Island that day, someone he didn't know before that afternoon. They met that day, and it's kind of one of those things, Shepard said. He really did like her, but that was the only time they ever hung out was at Horn Island on July 4th. By Shepard's account, Nolan stayed behind while Shepard himself took a boat back in the late afternoon. But Shepard's account is not the only one, and not everyone who was there agrees. Javon Williams, another friend on the trip who ended up on a separate boat after Nolan's filled up, pushed back directly. Speaking with CNN's Laura Coates, Williams said, "I don't think that Nolan would say, 'Bro, I'm staying with this girl on the island. Y'all go ahead and go back.'" Williams shared that as soon as their boats arrived on the island, Nolan told him he loved him, the last time he saw his best friend alive. There's a third thread, too. A cell phone video circulated widely online, a voice heard yelling, which many speculated was Nolan demanding his phone back during a confrontation. Shepard has directly addressed it. "That's me yelling," he told ABC News, explaining it was an unrelated altercation between himself and a stranger who started a fight with him, with no talk of a phone at all. Williams has backed that up, saying he also believes the voice belongs to Shepard. Crump has said the family has never met Shepard, and while they can't discount his account, they intend to weigh every version rather than settle on one. Independent investigators are now fielding 50 to 100 calls a day from people who were on Horn Island or know people who were. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, roughly an hour after Nolan was last confirmed seen, a distress call went out from the boat carrying his friends, placed to a private towing company. "We're sinking," a voice says in audio later obtained by NBC News. Plainly, urgently. The cause has since been explained directly by someone with a personal stake in this story. Ashley Cole, a Chancery judge for District 16-2 in Mississippi, and mother of Warren, one of the friends aboard that boat, posted a detailed statement on Facebook specifically to dispel rumors with facts. She wrote that Warren was interviewed by the Jackson County Sheriff's Department and cooperated fully, and that he saw Nolan last around 3 that afternoon. Describing what happened next, Cole wrote, "They left around 4:30 p.m. when the boat was taking on water, and they had an issue with the bilge pump. A bilge pump failure lets water accumulate in the hull faster than it can be cleared, putting the vessel and everyone aboard at real risk." Cole wrote her statement after facing public suspicion that her position as a sitting judge might be used to shield her son. "No one in our family is trying in any way to impede with the investigation by law enforcement," she wrote. "Yes, I am a judge. I also value transparency." She confirmed she and her husband weren't on the island and revealed she and Nolan's mother, Christine Wansley, graduated from the same high school, part of the same tight-knit Mississippi Gulf Coast community. By Cole's account, once the bilge pump issue was addressed, Nolan made the decision to stay and return later with a different group. Separately, and independently of Cole's account, GPS tracking data from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, obtained by CBS News, confirms the boat departed Horn Island at exactly 4:31 p.m. Not roughly, not approximately, logged automatically by the vessel's own tracking system. Sheriff John Ledbetter has publicly confirmed Nolan did not return with that boat. What's notable is how closely these separate pieces of evidence align. A distress call around 4 o'clock, a documented departure at 4:31, and a judge's public account of a bilge pump failure severe enough to require outside help, 3 sources largely reinforcing rather than contradicting one another. In the fuller NBC audio, the operator tells a dispatcher, "Hey, we're at the west tip of Horn, and our bilge pump stopped working. We're going. We're sinking. Can you all please come? I want to get this boat unsank and towed back." The dispatcher asked if everyone aboard was accounted for and in good health. The caller confirmed yes. That tells us the group aboard was safe, but it doesn't establish whether Nolan was ever expected to be counted among them at all. It doesn't tell us what he did next, who he may have been with, or what happened to him in the hours between that departure and the moment 2 days later when his body would be found off Horn Island's northwestern tip. Sometimes the most unsettling parts of a story aren't found in what someone says, but in cold, mechanical data that doesn't lie or forget. The GPS data traces exactly where that boat went next. It first returned to the same dock on El Camino Real Road, then moved into Fort Bayou at 5:52 p.m., 6 minutes shy of 2 hours after leaving Horn Island. It was back at the dock by 6:06 p.m., just 14 minutes later, a short, unremarkable stretch that wouldn't draw a second glance under other circumstances. But then, just over an hour after that, at 7:19 p.m., the data shows the boat arriving at the Fort Bayou boat launch, where it was finally pulled from the water entirely. Dock, bayou, dock again, then the launch. Hours during which, as far as the public record shows, no one aboard had yet reported Nolan missing. From the launch, the boat was loaded and transported overland, almost certainly towed behind a vehicle, ending its journey that night at a private residence in Biloxi, Mississippi, the home of the boat's owners, whose identity remains publicly undisclosed even now, weeks into the investigation. The Department of Marine Resources report names 3 people as cooperating with investigators that evening: the boat's owner, the owner's mother, and 1 additional individual who had been with Nolan earlier that day. None have been named suspects or persons of interest by any law enforcement agency. The report simply confirms they were present, reachable, and cooperative. The agency's documentation closes on July 5th, the day after Nolan went missing, the exact moment jurisdiction formally transferred to the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, which became, and remains, the lead investigative agency. What had been, on paper, a routine report about a mechanical issue and a missing passenger became, by July 5th, something far more serious. A missing persons case, an 18-year-old gone, and the boat that carried him to Horn Island making its way home, docked to Bayou to launch to Biloxi without him. The data gives us a precise, undisputed record of where that boat traveled. What it can't give us is what was happening on Horn Island during those same hours. For 2 full days, Horn Island held its silence, while the boat that carried Nolan's friends had already returned to the mainland and been towed to Biloxi. Christine Wansley reported her son missing that same night, and what followed became a coordinated multi-agency search, reflecting how seriously authorities treated the disappearance of an 18-year-old on a remote wilderness island with no shelter and no cell service. The United States Coast Guard, the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, and, since Horn Island falls under federal jurisdiction as part of the Gulf Islands National Seashore, the National Park Service, all joined the effort. So did the United Cajun Navy, a volunteer search and rescue organization known for stepping in during Gulf Coast emergencies, ordinary people giving up their own time to search for a young man many had never met. The search continued through July 5th and into the early morning hours of July 6th. It was a National Park Service agent working the shoreline near the island's northwestern tip who found him. Nolan Wells was discovered in the water, face down, roughly 2 days after he was last seen alive, bringing a form of resolution to one question while opening an entirely new set of them. Jackson County Coroner Bruce Lynn confirmed identification through dental records. On July 7th, the State Medical Examiner's Office performed an official autopsy. The results, central to which is toxicology testing used to determine whether alcohol or drugs played any role, have not been released. A Mississippi Department of Public Safety spokesperson addressed the wait, saying, "Every case is unique and deserves a thorough review. Therefore, cases cannot all be handled the same way or on the same timeline. Toxicology can take weeks under normal laboratory conditions." Nolan's parents also arranged an independent autopsy, flying his body to Washington, D.C., specifically so the exam could be conducted by a doctor with no professional or institutional ties to Mississippi law enforcement, so the family could trust the findings completely. Results were originally expected by Friday, July 10th, but Crump said the release was delayed due to complications simply transporting the body. Both sets of results, the state's and the independent one, remain pending. There's also a separate, deeply personal question. Nolan did not have his cell phone or his keys with him when his body was recovered, small details that carry real weight for a family trying to reconstruct his final hours. His phone was eventually returned to his parents, but Christine and Elmore Wansley believe some messages appear to have been deleted, prompting Crump to formally call for investigators to examine his friends' phones as well, not just Nolan's own device. Nearly 3 weeks after his son disappeared, Elmore Wansley sat for an interview that became one of the defining moments of this case. "No, he wouldn't. Nolan always stays with the group," Elmore told CBS Mornings. "If you be with me, you come back with me." I would have told them, "You're going to get back on this boat with me because I don't want to answer to your parents if something happens to you." Asked directly whether he believed Nolan had been left behind, he didn't hesitate. "Yes. I don't believe he decided to stay on the island by himself." That single word, spoken by a grieving father on national television, is not a legal accusation and not proof of wrongdoing by anyone, but it's the clearest, most direct public statement from either of Nolan's parents rejecting the idea that their son simply chose to remain behind for a girl or any other reason. Crump has said the friends' accounts contain contradictions about why Nolan stayed behind, conflicting versions of the same few hours. Layer Shepard's story about a girl, Williams's pushback, Judge Cole's bilge pump account naming her son Warren, or by several accounts her stepson, and Elmore's flat rejection of all of it together. And what emerges isn't one coherent story, but several, describing the same few hours on the same small island, none of them fully agreeing with one another. That gap has fueled something more dangerous than public debate. Judge Ashley Cole disclosed that her family received death threats, forcing her to temporarily deactivate her own social media accounts, stepping back from public life even as a sitting judge whose position typically demands public accountability. Shepard said he and other friends have too. "It worries me for my friends," he told ABC News. "It worries me for my family." The FBI confirmed publicly it is working to address interstate threats that were received by individuals related to this matter, without naming who specifically had been targeted. Underneath much of this sits a conversation about race that's been present from the beginning. Nolan was one of the few black members of a predominantly white friend group, and in the weeks since, that fact has become part of a broader public debate about whether race shaped how seriously his death was treated. A CNN law enforcement analyst said he understood why some Mississippians are concerned, while cautioning that drawing firm conclusions before the autopsy results are released would be a disservice to the family. If you've been with us this far, you understand why this case has held so much attention for 3 straight weeks. Make sure you're subscribed. We'll cover every update the moment it's confirmed. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. On July 15th, Christine and Elmore Wonsley met with Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath, their first meeting with her office since Nolan's body was recovered. Crump called it respectful, both sides honest and candid throughout. McElrath confirmed that, once the investigation concludes, the findings will go to a grand jury, a standard procedural step that doesn't by itself imply suspected criminal activity. Crump released a statement. "A thorough investigation must be completed, and the district attorney must put every relevant fact before the grand jury. Nothing held back, nothing overlooked." By that meeting, Sheriff John Ledbetter confirmed investigators had interviewed approximately 60 witnesses, a substantial number for a single death investigation, including all 3 friends who traveled to Horn Island with Nolan, some more than once, as new evidence like the GPS data and the distress call audio surfaced and required follow-up questioning. The following day, July 16th, Governor Tate Reeves addressed the case publicly for the first time, confirming Department of Public Safety Commissioner Sean Tyndall had been in direct contact with those involved, and noting the state autopsy had been carried out by the medical examiner's office under that same department. Reeves said he personally knows Sheriff Ledbetter, but hadn't spoken with him directly about the case, adding, "I have full confidence that he is going to do his job." It was a brief, measured comment, but the fact that a sitting governor felt compelled to say anything publicly about the death of a single 18-year-old speaks to just how far this story had traveled. Crump also confirmed that experts working for the family will conduct a joint, mutual inspection of Nolan's cell phone alongside the district attorney's office, rather than as separate competing examinations, addressing the family's belief that messages had been deleted before the phone was returned to them. So here's where the investigation stands. 2 autopsies completed, both still withheld, the state's toxicology results, and the independent Washington, D.C. examination. A $100,000 reward still on the table, born from Sharpton's initial pledge and Perry's real-time match. A grand jury process waiting on the investigation's formal conclusion. A joint cell phone investigation now underway. We still don't know, definitively, how Nolan Wells died, or what happened to him in the hours after his friend's boat pulled away without him. What we do know is this. This case is not closed. Not for investigators. Not for a family still waiting on 2 sets of results. And not for the thousands who followed Nolan Wells' story from a 4th of July boat trip to a funeral attended by some of the most recognizable names in the country. If today's video helped you understand where this case truly stands, make sure you're subscribed. Because the moment toxicology results are released, the moment this case reaches that grand jury, we will be here to break it down for you, fact by fact, exactly as we have today.